Breaking news from South Africa. A burial permit for former President Edgar Chagwa Lungu has reportedly been issued. What does this mean for the ongoing court battle? Will the body finally be laid to rest? And where? Let's break down everything you need to know in this urgent report. Breaking news. A new development in the burial saga of Zambia's former President Edgar Lungu. Reports from South Africa suggest that a burial permit has been approved, potentially clearing the way for his interment. However, this decision may trigger fresh tension between the Lungu family, the Zambian government, and South African legal authorities. In this report, we cover the latest on the burial permit from South African officials, reaction from the Lungu family and Zambian leaders, what this means for the legal battle and burial timeline. Will Lungu be buried in South Africa or Zambia? Only on InspirAfrica Official. Real news, real impact. 1. The latest on the burial permit from South African officials. The status of the burial permit for former Zambian President Edgar Lungu remains unresolved as of July 8, 2025, with no definitive evidence that South African officials have issued or denied a permit. The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria's intervention on June 25, 2025, halted Lungu's planned burial in Johannesburg, rendering any potential permit issuance contingent on the court's final ruling, scheduled for August 4, 2025. This legal standoff stems from a dispute between the Zambian government, which seeks to repatriate Lungu's body for a state funeral, and the Lungu family, who prefer a private burial in South Africa. On June 24, 2025, Zambia's Attorney General, Mulalo Kabesha, filed an urgent application in the Pretoria High Court to interdict the burial, arguing that Lungu, as a former president, should be buried in Zambia with full military honors. The court's ruling on June 25, 2025, reflected an agreement between the parties to suspend the burial pending further legal proceedings, with Kabesha given until July 4, 2025, to submit an amended notice of motion, and the Lungu family until July 11, 2025, to respond. The suspension was extended until at least July 18, 2025, according to some ex-posts, though the August 4th hearing date is more consistently cited in web reports. South African officials, including the Department of Home Affairs and local health authorities responsible for burial permits, have not publicly commented on the permit status, likely due to the court's oversight. The process for issuing a burial permit in South Africa typically involves verifying the death certificate and ensuring compliance with health regulations, but Lungu's case is complicated by his status as a foreign dignitary and the international legal dispute. A South African death certificate was issued, facilitating the family's initial burial plans, but the court's intervention has paused any further action. The Zambian government's legal arguments emphasize that Lungu's burial in Zambia aligns with national tradition and public interest, citing the precedent of founding President Kenneth Kaunda, whose family's wishes were overridden in 2021 for a state burial at Embassy Memorial Park in Lusaka. The government contends that Lungu's acceptance of benefits under the former President's Benefits Act implies his intent for a state funeral, as he left no specific burial instructions in his will. Conversely, the Lungu family, represented by lawyer Makibi Zulu, insists on a private burial in South Africa, citing Lungu's alleged wish that President Hakainde Hichilema not attend his funeral due to their political rivalry. The lack of a permit reflects South Africa's cautious approach, prioritizing judicial resolution over unilateral action. South Africa's Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola has emphasized respecting the family's wishes while acknowledging Zambia's interest in a state burial, indicating diplomatic sensitivity. The August 4, 2025 hearing will determine whether a permit can be issued for a South African burial or if repatriation to Zambia is mandated, significantly impacting the timeline and location of Lungu's final resting place. 2. Reaction from the Lungu family and Zambian leaders. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has elicited strong reactions from both the Lungu family and Zambian leaders, highlighting deep-seated personal and political tensions. Lungu family's reaction. The Lungu family, including widow Esther Lungu and children Bertha, Tasila, Chaisu, and Dalitso, has been steadfast in their desire to bury Lungu in South Africa, where he died on June 5, 2025. Their decision to organize a private burial at the Cathedral of Christ the King in Johannesburg on June 25, 2025 was disrupted by the court's last-minute injunction, forcing them to attend a hearing in Pretoria instead of the planned funeral. Esther Lungu's visible distress during a subsequent memorial mass underscores the emotional toll of the prolonged dispute. The family's spokesperson, Makibi Zulu, announced on June 20, 2025 that the burial would take place in South Africa, thanking the South African government for its non-interference and support for a private ceremony. The family's opposition to repatriation is rooted in Lungu's alleged dying wish that Hichilema, his political rival, not be involved in his funeral. This wish reflects the bitter feud between the two leaders, marked by Hichilema's 2017 imprisonment under Lungu's administration for treason over a motorcade incident. The family's distrust of the Zambian government is further compounded by allegations of mistreatment during Lungu's final years. Ex-posts suggest that medical staff at the South African hospital where Lungu died reported threats from Zambian officials attempting to repatriate his body without family consent. While this claim is inconclusive without corroboration, it aligns with the family's narrative of government overreach. Additionally, the family's refusal to allow body viewing and concerns raised on X about about Lungu possibly using a Zimbabwean passport have fueled speculation, though these remain unverified. The Lungu family's legal defense, led by Makibi Zulu, argues that they are within their rights to arrange a private burial, emphasizing Lungu's status as a private citizen in South Africa during his final months. Their persistence in court, despite facing corruption charges in Zambia, suggests a determination to honor Lungu's wishes, even at the cost of public and political backlash. Zambian leaders' reaction. Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema and his administration have taken a resolute stance that Lungu's burial must occur in Zambia, framing it as a matter of national pride and tradition. Hichilema has argued that Lungu, as a former president, belongs to the nation of Zambia and deserves a state funeral with full military honors at Embassy Memorial Park, where other presidents are buried. The government's legal actions, including the urgent court application filed on June 24, 2025, reflect their commitment to repatriation. Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha has been the government's lead advocate, asserting that Lungu's lack of specific burial instructions in his will and his acceptance of benefits under the former President's Benefits Act imply a state funeral. Kabesha cited the Conda precedent, where national interest superseded family wishes, and emphasized that a former president is national property whose burial should be state-managed. The government's filing also argues that Lungu's benefits were only suspended during his return to active politics, not revoked, reinforcing their claim to oversee his burial. Minister of Information Cornelius Mwitwa clarified on July 3, 2025, that the legal process is driven by public interest, not malice or an intent to pressure the family. Mwitwa acknowledged the possibility that the court's ruling may not align with the majority of Zambians' wishes for a state burial, but stressed the government's commitment to an amicable resolution. Hichilema's decision to shorten the national mourning period from 16 to 7 days after the family blocked repatriation was controversial, with some viewing it as practical and others as disrespectful to Lungu's legacy. The government's actions have drawn criticism from Lungu's Patriotic Front (PF) party and civil society. PF acting President Gibbon Labinda accused the government of turning a solemn occasion into a political game, while religious leaders like Emmanuel Chikoya called for dialogue to preserve national dignity. Public sentiment, as reflected on X, includes frustration with the government's aggressive legal tactics, with one user describing the situation as a sad period in the history of our Zambian politics. 3. What this means for the legal battle and burial timeline. The legal battle over Edgar Lungu's burial is a complex interplay of international law, family rights, and state authority, with significant implications for the burial timeline. Legal battle. The Gauteng High Court's June 25, 2025, ruling to halt Lungu's burial was a temporary measure agreed upon by both parties to allow further deliberation on the repatriation issue. The court's scheduling of a full hearing for August 4, 2025 indicates a thorough examination of competing claims. Key legal issues include jurisdiction and international law. The case is adjudicated in South Africa, where Lungu died, but involves a Zambian former president. The Pretoria High Court must navigate South African burial regulations, Zambian constitutional mandates, and international norms for deceased dignitaries. The Zambian government's reliance on Article 177(5)(c) of its constitution, which empowers the Attorney General to protect public interests, strengthens their case but faces scrutiny in a foreign court. State versus family rights. The Zambian government argues that a former president's burial is a state matter, citing the Conda precedent and the former President's Benefits Act. The Lungu family counters that their private burial plans respect Lungu's wishes and his status as a private citizen in South Africa. The court must balance these competing rights, potentially setting a precedent for similar disputes. Passport controversy. Ex-posts raise unverified concerns that Lungu may have used a Zimbabwean passport in South Africa, which could complicate his legal status at the time of death. If substantiated, this could affect the court's jurisdiction or the family's standing, but no official documents confirm this claim. The Zambian government's amended motion, filed by July 4, 2025, and the family's response, due by July 11, 2025, will shape the August 4 hearing. The court's ruling will determine whether Lungu's burial proceeds in South Africa or if his body is repatriated to Zambia. Burial timeline. The suspension of the burial until at least August 4, 2025 has significantly delayed the process. If the court rules for repatriation, additional time will be needed to transport Lungu's body to Zambia, organize a state funeral, and address logistical challenges, such as preserving the remains. A state funeral would likely involve national mourning, military honors, and public ceremonies at Embassy Memorial Park, potentially taking weeks to coordinate. If the court sides with the family, a burial permit could be issued promptly, allowing a private ceremony in South Africa. However, the family's initial plans were disrupted, and reorganizing the funeral may require further preparation. The delay has already caused logistical issues, with mourners left in limbo during the June 25th Mass, and prolonged uncertainty could exacerbate these challenges. The timeline remains uncertain, as additional legal motions or appeals could extend the process beyond August 2025. The court's decision will also influence public perception and diplomatic relations, as both Zambia and South Africa navigate the fallout. 4. Will Lungu be buried in South Africa or Zambia? The question of whether Edgar Lungu will be buried in South Africa or Zambia hinges on the Pretoria High Court's August 4, 2025 ruling. Both sides present compelling arguments, rooted in legal, cultural, and personal considerations. The Zambian government insists on repatriation, arguing that Lungu's status as a former president mandates a state burial at Embassy Memorial Park, where all other Zambian presidents since independence in 1964 have been laid to rest. They cite the Konda precedent, where the government overrode family wishes, and argue that Lungu's lack of burial instructions in his will implies consent for a state funeral under the former President's Benefits Act. The government's preparation of a grave at the National Cemetery underscores their commitment. The Lungu family, however, prefers a private burial in South Africa, where Lungu died and reportedly spent his final months in self-imposed exile. Their decision is driven by Lungu's alleged wish to exclude Hichilema from his funeral, reflecting their distrust of the Zambian government. The family's plans for a Johannesburg burial were nearly realized on June 25, 2025, before the court's intervention, indicating their resolve. The court's ruling will determine the outcome. A ruling favoring the government would likely result in repatriation, with South African authorities facilitating the process. A ruling for the family would allow a South African burial, assuming a permit is issued. The unverified passport issue, if raised in court, could complicate matters, but its impact is speculative without evidence. Public sentiment on X suggests a preference for resolution, with some questioning the relevance of the dispute given Lungu's death. The court's decision will not only resolve the burial location, but also influence Zambia's political landscape and its relations with South Africa. 5. Breaking burial permit issued. As of July 8, 2025, there is no credible evidence that a burial permit has been issued for Edgar Lungu's burial in South Africa. The claim of a breaking burial permit issued is unsupported by web reports or X posts, which consistently indicate that the burial was halted on June 25, 2025, and remained suspended pending the August 4th hearing. The Gauteng High Court's ruling effectively paused all burial-related actions, including permit issuance, until the repatriation dispute is resolved. South African authorities have not commented on the permit process, likely due to the case's sensitivity and judicial oversight. The family's initial possession of a South African death certificate suggests they were prepared to seek a permit, but the court's intervention has rendered this moot. Speculative claims on X, such as concerns about a Zimbabwean passport, have not been addressed by officials and do not alter the permit's current hold status. Until the court rules, no permit issuance is expected. 6. Who approved the permit? Since no burial permit has been issued, the question of who approved it is inapplicable. In South Africa, burial permits are typically issued by municipal health departments or the Department of Home Affairs, following verification of a death certificate and compliance with regulations. In Lungu's case, the process is stalled by the court's suspension of the burial. If a permit were to be issued post-ruling, it would likely involve Johannesburg municipal authorities, given the planned burial location. However, the court's oversight and the international nature of the case suggest that any approval would require coordination with higher government levels, possibly involving South Africa's Department of International Relations and cooperation to address diplomatic implications. 7. What this means for the burial. The ongoing legal dispute and absence of a burial permit have profound implications for Edgar Lungu's burial. Emotional and social impact. The delay has caused significant distress for the Lungu family, who were forced to abandon their June 25th funeral plans and face public scrutiny. Mourners at the Cathedral of Christ the King were informed of the suspension only after a mass, adding to their confusion and grief. The public feud has also sparked debate in Zambia, with some viewing it as disrespectful to Lungu's memory. Logistical challenges. The prolonged delay complicates the preservation of Lungu's remains, held by a funeral services company in South Africa. If repatriation is ordered, transporting the body and organizing a state funeral will require extensive planning. A South African burial, if allowed, would also need reorganization due to the initial disruption. Political ramifications. The dispute has fueled political tensions, with the PF accusing Hichilema's government of politicizing Lungu's death. The government's legal tactics risk alienating Lungu supporters, while a South African burial could be seen as a snub to national tradition. The August 4th ruling will dictate the burial's location, timeline, and nature, shaping its emotional and political legacy. 8. Legal and political implications. The case has significant legal and political implications, with far-reaching consequences for Zambia, South Africa, and regional norms. Legal implications. Precedent for repatriation. The court's ruling will set a precedent for handling deceased foreign dignitaries, particularly in cases of conflicting state and family wishes. The Konda case strengthens Zambia's argument, but a ruling for the family could affirm individual rights. International law. The case tests the application of South African law to a foreign former president, raising questions about jurisdiction and diplomatic immunity. Constitutional issues. Zambia's reliance on the former President's Benefits Act and constitutional mandates may influence future interpretations of state authority over former leaders. Political implications. Zambia-South Africa relations. The dispute has strained diplomatic ties, with Hichilema apologizing to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa for the impasse. A ruling against repatriation could further complicate relations. Domestic politics. The case has deepened Zambia's political divide, with the PF leveraging it to criticize criticize Hichilema. Public frustration, as seen on X, may impact Hichilema's 2026 election prospects. Regional norms. The outcome may influence how African nations handle deceased leaders' burials, particularly in politically charged contexts. 9. Zambia reacts to the news. Zambian public reaction, as reflected in web reports and X posts, is polarized. Many support a state burial, viewing it as a matter of national honor, while others criticize the government's legal tactics as intrusive. The PF's condemnation of the government's actions resonates with Lungu supporters, while civil society calls for dialogue to restore dignity. X posts highlight frustration with the prolonged dispute, with some questioning its relevance and others raising unverified concerns about Lungu's passport. The shortened mourning period and legal feud have left many Zambians feeling that Lungu's legacy is being overshadowed by politics. 10. What happens next? The next steps depend on the August 4, 2025 court ruling. Repatriation ordered. Lungu's body will be transported to Zambia for a state funeral, requiring coordination between South African and Zambian authorities. Family prevails. A burial permit will likely be issued for a South African burial, allowing the family to reorganize the private ceremony. Further delays, additional legal challenges, or appeals could extend the process, prolonging uncertainty. In the interim, both sides will prepare for the hearing, with public and diplomatic attention focused on the outcome. The ruling will shape Lungu's legacy and Zambia's political future.